Okay, the topic for today is the carbon cycle, and instead of it's sort of a lecture, but also really this is designed as leading a discussion. This hands down is probably everybody's favorite class period if we're in the classroom, and sadly we're not. But I have this designed as like a game basically that we do in the classroom. Where I post questions to groups, and groups are competing for the correct answer. And so sadly, we can't really do that to the same extent online, but the purpose, the learning objectives for it, which is to be able to really understand the difference between the slow and fast carbon cycles, identify the main components of each cycle, and begin to recognize the difference between a human altered carbon cycle and a quote natural carbon cycle, I do think are much better captured in an interactive format. So what I've done is kept that structure for you to do on your own. If you and your partner have really connected at this point, feel free to get together with them and do this with them as well. But what I'll do is I'll have a question posted, and you would need to, I'm just going to keep going through. I'll take a slight pause on each question slide. You also have the questions in these slides separately posted. And go ahead and take the time to actually try to answer those questions, write them out, and then you can test yourself as I go over the answers. So really great way to start reviewing for the test and really make sure that you learn the material. Okay, so question 1, draw the fast carbon cycle and include a caption that explains it. So this is my, well, not mine, this is taken from the other source, but this is a figure that essentially shows us the components of the fast carbon cycle. And so what you can see here is that photosynthesis and respiration are the main components of the fast carbon cycle. And I wrote up a quick caption that captures this. So the fast carbon cycle is primarily driven by photosynthesis and respiration. The decomposition of organic matter will also contribute to the slow carbon cycle in terms of replenishing soil organic carbon. Should be a reminder of things you've learned at some point, which is photosynthesis. The leaf takes in carbon dioxide and water, and it makes sugar out of that in the form of a glucose molecule, and it gives off oxygen. And then your respirating organisms, well, actually plants respirate as well, and so they eat some of their own sugar, but they will have a net amount of sugar that they offer up to the rest of the food chain, and that is what we refer to as net primary production. And then the animals will consume these sugars, so they'll take in the glucose and they'll take in oxygen, and they give off carbon dioxide and water, and in the process they actually create energy that they use in order to drive their life functions. And so this is the fast carbon cycle has this quite perfect balance, right, between the photosynthesizing organisms drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and the respirating organisms or cells, if you will, putting the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Okay, so the second part of the carbon cycle, draw the slow carbon cycle and include a caption that explains it. So I took this off. I didn't actually have a good one already, so I took in the article, and so instead I took this off of this website here. Hopefully they're anyway. So how does the slow carbon cycle work? Carbon dioxide and water form carbonic acid together, so slightly acidic solution that will go and it will fall on rock, and it will be slowly weathering these rock surfaces. The slow weathering of that will, this carbon will enter the water, essentially enters into the water cycle, and will run off into larger bodies of water, as water tends to do, and it will go ahead and settle to the bottom of the ocean and get moved into the rock cycle. So kind of similar to what we saw with phosphate in the phosphorus cycle, right? So this carbon is moving through the, it's going back into bedrock, right? And then that melting carbonate rock would go ahead and be released through volcanoes as carbon dioxide. So this is a very slow process that's happening over thousands of years, right? This is not the time scale of our fast carbon cycle, which happens with every breath, or at longer periods in days, or for decomposition, maybe as long as a year. Whereas this is a much slower process happening over long time scales. This is actually, I think, a much better diagram, but it has more going on in it. So I wanted to isolate those two first. Here you can see the fast carbon cycle happening over here. And then some carbon can be buried. And here you are seeing the slow carbon cycle happening, right, with the atmospheric carbon dioxide. Oh, this is actually a fast carbon cycle happening in the ocean, sorry. So again, don't forget that there are photosynthesizing and respirating organisms in the ocean, but you also have the weathering of rock, right, that's gonna be going ahead and getting sedimented and moving into this slow cycle. Also, deep buried carbon would be moving into the slow cycle. So what you see in this figure that extra complicates it is the tipping of the scales, right? These deposits of carbon-rich materials, which we've come to know as our fossil fuels because they come from fossilized decaying matter, right? So matter that comes from this buried carbon. We've gone ahead and we've pulled a bunch of that out because we found that when you burn these fossil fuels, they are extremely energy rich. So much more so than our biomass, which is what we burned before we found fossil fuels. So we've been burning wood for hundreds of years, but these fossil fuels, first with coal, then natural gas and oil, have allowed us to get their much higher energy rich sources, and they are what are driving our energy and economy today, as we've already looked at. However, it's a combustion reaction, right? You take those carbon molecules and you combine them with oxygen in the air, and you are giving off carbon dioxide and water, along with some other pollutants into the atmosphere. And so that's how we get more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's a very kind of simple process of we're digging up these deposits that are deep in the earth, we're burning them, and the carbon dioxide is going into the atmosphere. So very basic chemistry and basic science going into our understanding of the disruption of the balance in the carbon cycle. A few things to keep in mind. Volcanoes, so that slow carbon cycle, they would naturally emit between 130 and 380 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. So many people are aware that volcanoes put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but they pale in comparison to what humans do. So humans emit about 30 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year. And we're putting that into the atmosphere. So if you just think about a balanced cycle, this pretty basic math should make it pretty clear to you that we've tipped those scales in favor of increased amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and lesser and less amounts of carbon deposited into the earth. Okay, another question. Why does the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere go up and down throughout the year? So this has to do, and there's quite a few figures in the reading about this, but this has to do with the simple fact that during certain times of the year, you have more photosynthesizing organisms active on the planet. And since if you take a look at a globe, most of the landmass of the planet is in the northern hemisphere. So when it is summer in the northern hemisphere, and we're going to talk about climate in the next lecture, so if that's a little confusing to you, hold on tight, we'll get there. But when it's summer in the northern hemisphere, you have more plants actively photosynthesizing and drawing that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And when it's winter, it's the opposite. So here you can see the annual cycle, that the lowest points are actually in September and October at the end of the summer, and then it turns with those high points at the end of the winter. And so when we talk about, general amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we usually measure them in parts per million. And we usually talk about this trend line in the middle. So this average point of the cycling seasons. However, we've hit a few landmarks. So not long ago, we had a September that was above 400 parts per million. So the time when it should be at the lowest was already way above, was already above 400 parts per million. And I believe that was already a couple years ago. So another question, how have humans altered the carbon cycle? All right, so looking here, you can see here's just some general ways we've altered the carbon cycle, and we'll get into some more specifics with climate change. But what you can see here is that we're emitting more fossil fuel into the atmosphere, so we're digging up that carbon, we're burning it, and we are also deforesting, which means that we have fewer photosynthesizing organisms on the surface of the Earth, able to capture that carbon, or we say sequester it, and pull it back down. Um, and then there are these other, there's oceanic uptake. So we're going to learn with ocean acidification that quite a bit of this carbon dioxide will go ahead and go into the ocean as well. And there is some unknown of this missing carbon sink. There's some carbon that we're not fully sure where it's ending up, which is again that idea of the uncertainty with the planetary boundary and the potential to tip scales. What is the relationship between carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere and temperature? Okay, so with those last slides, they should have gotten you through the basics of the carbon cycle, and hopefully you are understanding it now. And the reason we talk about the carbon cycle is to understand this issue of climate change. So this nice figure that was in your reading, we have, and we're able to, in fact, in our climate change lab, you're going to reproduce some of these graphs with publicly available data. But what you're seeing here is that there's a strong correlation when we're able to cast back thousands of years through our climate proxies, and you're able to see this up and down of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that is closely correlating with our proxies for estimating the temperature. And the two almost perfectly coincide throughout time. And then again, in the present day, we're seeing this increased rise in carbon dioxide that is perfectly correlating to our increased temperatures on the planet. All right, so those should cover the basics for you. Hopefully you were able to use those as questions to test your knowledge, and you'll be more prepared to understand our topics of climate change.